Hi guys, it's Radhika here again. So thank you for joining me. Today we're going to continue our discussion about medical school prep, but we're going to start talking about the MCAT. Now, this is going to be a very heavy portion of this video series. However, in today's video, I'll just be introducing the MCAT. So we'll talk about some of the basics, and basically I'll answer questions like what it is, why it exists, and a brief few things about its layout. And then as we get into this series a little more, I'll start explaining things with more depth. All right, so let's get started. Now, the first question always is so what really is the MCAT? And the MCAT stands for the Medical College Admission Test, MCAT. It is a 6-hour and 15-minute exam, and it's standardized and written by the AAMC. Now, the AAMC is the American Association of Medical Colleges. And although the fact that it's an American board that actually writes and administers this exam, it is a requirement for most Canadian medical schools. There used to be quite a few medical schools that didn't require the MCAT in the past, but recently all of them have started switching over to having this as a necessary component as a part of your med school application. So why does it exist then? Because we've all heard stories about it. We've heard that it's really hard, it's super long, it takes about 3 months to study for, and a lot of people do well, and some people don't do well on it. It's that one monster that I think every pre-med kind of dreads. So why have they even made this kind of an exam, and what kind of purpose does it serve? Well, I'll tell you. So it exists basically, first and foremost, as a means to standardize thousands of applicants, right? So if you think about it, we all come from diverse academic backgrounds. Some of us are in the sciences. Some of us are not in the sciences. We go to various institutions, and we take a variety of classes with a very vast means of being able to score how well we did on those classes. So all the medical schools would be able to see is our GPA, and they wouldn't be able to make much of that number because there is no standardization. How do you compare somebody who has a 4.0 GPA in accounting to somebody who may have a 3.7 in biomechanical engineering? So there's no standardization that actually exists amongst people from various academic backgrounds. And as a means to standardize every single applicant, the MCAT serves that purpose primarily. But it does serve a bit of a different purpose as well. And that's to be able to test your critical thinking skills, skills that the AAMC and almost all medical schools unanimously agree are very, very crucial to practicing medicine. So critical thinking skills are something that your GPA doesn't reflect. Your GPA reflects your academic abilities in a series of subjects that you took throughout your undergraduate or your graduate career. But it doesn't really tell the medical schools how great of a thinking skill set that you actually possess. So what they said, the AAMCs, is why don't we create a test, an exam, which basically looks at or tests applicants' abilities on a level of critical thinking. How good are they at critical thinking? And the numerical value that you get out of this exam would be an indicator of your critical thinking skills. So again, MCAT exists for 2 reasons. Primarily to standardize all applicants from various academic backgrounds, and secondly, to be able to take those critical thinking skills, evaluate them, and kind of standardize everyone in terms of how they rank on those thinking skills. Okay, now just as a bit of a side note, before the MCAT was introduced, what most medical schools in North America found was that there was all these students that used to get into medical school because this exam didn't exist, and they found that they didn't have the right kind of skills once they got into medical school to be a successful practicing physician. And what we saw was that for many, many years, the dropout rate amongst med students was about 50%. Yeah, that's right. Almost 1 in 2 students used to drop out of medical school just because they weren't the right candidate, and either because they found this out on their own, or the medical school, had to go back and say, "Look, yeah, we gave you an admission offer, but it doesn't seem like you're the right kind of candidate." What they found was once this exam was introduced, that dropout rate fell significantly. And when we say significantly, it went from about 50% to about 7%. And ever since it's been introduced, the dropout rate has continually declined. Okay, so that's why it exists. Now, I have to give you a word of caution. The biggest misconception about this exam is that it is a science test. And students who are not in the sciences, do not have an academic science background, think that they won't do well on it because they haven't gotten through 3 or 4 years of basic level sciences as anyone with a science major. That's not the case. And the reason being is that, yes, although you need to have a certain baseline level of scientific understanding, the MCAT is not a science test. It is a thinking skills test. And the reason it's a thinking skills test, especially a critical thinking skills test, is because what it actually evaluates is your abilities to problem solve, your abilities to involve critical thinking and critical reasoning. So it's not one of those exams that's synonymous to how you would study for an undergraduate class, where perhaps you attend class, you take lecture notes, you read the textbook, you go back and read those lecture notes, and should you have 100% understanding of all the information that was covered in class, you can do really, really well on midterms and exams. So the MCAT's not like that, because although you need a scientific understanding in order to do well, if you don't have the right skills, problem solving, critical thinking, critical reasoning, analytical skills, then knowing 100% of the sciences isn't going to help you do 100% on this exam. Okay, so it is a thinking skills test. It's not a science test. And it exists exactly for that purpose, right? We talked about in the previous slide that it's a means to standardize and to test critical thinking, and that's exactly what it does. So if medical schools want to look at how great your academic abilities are, how well you are proficient in the sciences, well, they can look to your GPA. That is, if you had a science major. Now, if they want to see how well you'll be able to perform as a physician based on some of the critical abilities that you're supposed to have, this is when they'll look at the MCAT score. So it's a very, very important factor of your application because it serves a purpose entirely different from your GPA. It does not convey much about your academic abilities, more about your thinking skills. Okay? So moving on, why does it matter then? And there's a few reasons. And the main one being is that the score that you actually get is used in multiple stages of your admissions process, okay? And there's 3 ways it's actually used. The first is as a minimum for admission. So it's kind of as a cutoff here, okay? So many medical schools have cutoffs. Not all of them do. Quite a lot of them do. And a cutoff is essentially the minimum score that you need in order for your application to even be considered. Now, if your MCAT score doesn't meet this minimum criteria, then your application is not even considered any further, okay? Your application is, so to speak, dead. They're not going to open up your file because you haven't met certain criteria that they have deemed as essential or crucial for you as an applicant to their school. Now, another way that it's actually used is as a pre-interview direct criteria score. So what this means is they set certain criteria and they say, if you've hit this criteria in all of the 4 sections, which I'll talk about later, then we will consider you for an interview. Now, this isn't even to consider your file. This is thereafter. This is when they've considered your file and are thinking of giving you an interview. And what they do is directly, they look at your score. Now, you think that may be all, because should you be invited for an interview, then they're probably going to look at your interview score afterwards to see, once you've gone through, should they be giving you an offer of admission. But that's a bit incorrect, because the MCAT score is also used as post-interview direct criteria. So although you have delivered this interview, it's not like they're going to discard looking at your MCAT score. Most admissions committees will still pay quite a bit of attention, not as much as they did in terms of your pre-interview direct criteria, but they do give it quite a bit of emphasis. Okay, so 3 ways in which it's actually used directly in admissions. Now that I've provided you with a bit of a basic understanding of what the MCAT's like, let's get a little bit deeper into the exam itself. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about here is the format. The first thing I want to share with you is that the MCAT is a passage-based exam. Now, what a passage-based exam refers to is the fact that this exam is arranged such that 80% of the questions that you're going to be answering are going to come from knowledge that you've obtained in a passage. Okay, 80%, approximately 185 out of the 230 questions there are in total, are going to come from a passage. Now, the passages vary in length, in difficulty, and in the number of questions. So each passage is typically followed by 4 to 6 questions, and those questions are based on the content that was presented in that text. The MCAT is also a computerized exam. So in 2007, it officially switched over to being computerized. You cannot request a paper and pencil version of this exam anymore. So bear with me for just a second, and I'll show you what it actually looks like. On top of that, it is 100% completely a multiple choice exam. Okay, now just a word of caution here, because when most of my students see the word multiple choice exam, they think, oh, great, okay, so easy. That means that they're going to present me with a series of answer options, and all I have to do is select the correct answer option. Not so much the case here. This kind of multiple choice exam is unlike any that you've actually seen in your undergraduate career so far. And the reason being is because the way that these questions are designed are to ambiguously make things tricky for you. They are ambiguous, and what you'll find, especially in the critical analysis and reasoning skills section that I'll talk to you about later, is that you're going to look at the 4 answer options that they give you, which is a standard for the MCAT, and be like, wow, none of these are correct. And at that point, you're going to come to the realization that this is one of those exams that asks you to select the least wrong answer option. Not the one that's most correct, or not the one that is correct, but the one that is least incorrect. So if it wasn't hard enough already, it's a lot more harder now. You may know that all answer A, B, C, and D are not entirely correct, but your job as a test taker is to select the one that is the least incorrect. So you can tell that although this is not a science test, your science skills have to be excellent for you to be able to comment on the inaccuracy of the answer options that have been presented to you. Okay, so moving on. This is what the computer interface looks like. Okay, so in the red box on the left here, what you can see is that half of the screen will always be devoted to your passage. So there it says passage 1, questions 1 to 4. So this passage in particular looks like it has some figures, it has some text. A lot of the text happens to be captions that follow that figure. And it doesn't look very text heavy. Some of these images though, I don't know how I feel about that. And the fact that they've wrote reaction 1 here seems like in this series of diagrams that they're probably describing some sort of a reaction with the compounds that they've given to you in terms of figures. So passage always appears on the left-hand side of your screen. Now, on the right-hand side of your screen, what you'll see is 1 question appearing at a time. And this is very different. So prior to 2015, when the exam went through a major change, you used to be able to see all the questions that were associated with a single passage. Not the case anymore. You only see one question at a time. Now, you can toggle between questions. So if I want to see the next question, what I see on the bottom right of my screen is the next button. I'd have to click that and I'd be able to see the next question appearing, only one at a time. Now, the moment I click that, question number 4 here would disappear. You can go backwards as well. So that's the previous button right here on the bottom bar. Now, the other important thing that I want to draw your attention to here is, oops, moving this camera aside, is the time remaining button. So you'll see a timer that always counts down in hours, minutes, and seconds from the total time that you had per section. And we'll talk about the amount of time that you have in every section. So this is commonly how your screen is going to look. Now, you do have certain tools that will be available for you when you write this exam. One of those tools is going to be a highlight option. So any of the text that actually appears in your passage, what you can do is click on and hold and drag to highlight text. You cannot highlight equations. You cannot highlight diagrams, text only. Okay, now in terms of answering the questions themselves, one of the most useful tools that exists is a strikeout option. So let's say it was actually to do question number 4, and I was going through some sort of a process of elimination, and I knew that one of these answer options was not correct. What I would be able to do is strike that out, and I would click on the text of the question itself, and a line would appear through it, a horizontal line. And that means that I've narrowed down my options, and now that I've got 3 remaining. Now, you could do this up to 3 times in one question. So technically, I could eliminate 3 of the 4 answer options here, and then doing so would lead to deciphering the one that is correct. You can also flag questions, flag or mark. So that's the second button that you see here from the left. When I mark a question or flag a question, what it really does is allows me to revisit the question later by hitting on all the ones that were flagged and double clicking when I get to the review screen. So I'll tell you what the review screen is. The review screen you can access by pushing the review button. It'll show you all of the questions that were available to you in that section, and you can kind of take a shortcut to each one of those questions that you've flagged by double clicking on it. And a flag actually will appear next to that question, so you'll be able to distinguish the ones that you have flagged versus not flagged. Now, all of this seems really great because these are tools that you would not have really had available to you on the paper pencil version of this exam. But I want to leave you with a word of caution here. Your reading speed, study after study has shown, is on average 10% slower on screen than it is on paper. And it's because of the way the human eye perceives light bouncing off of a paper versus light that is kind of reflected from a screen. So you do read about 10% slower. That means for a question, for an exam that's mostly passage-based and is quite text-heavy, now you're going to read slower than you actually do. So what I'm really trying to say here is when you're studying for this exam, you want to make sure you do as much of your practice as possible on screen, because that's what it's going to be on like test day. And you want to simulate those conditions as best as possible. Okay, so that kind of concludes my basic overview of the MCAT for today. We'll continue these talks about the MCAT as we go further in this video series, but my takeaway messages from this video would basically be that the MCAT serves to standardize applicants from a diverse array of academic backgrounds, first and foremost, okay? So it standardizes everyone that applies to medical school. It is a long exam, 6 hours and 15 minutes of total writing time. It is computer-based, and on top of that, most of it, 80% of it, is passage-based. So you have to be able to read those passages in order to answer the questions correctly. But I think the biggest takeaway from this video is that this exam is a critical thinking skills exam. It's not a science test. And in order to do well on it, you must have absolutely phenomenal knowledge of the sciences, but furthermore, you really, really have to have excellent critical thinking skills. Okay, so I hope you were able to take away lots of good information from this exam, and I'll see you next time where we'll keep digging further a little more about the MCAT. So see you next time. Bye, guys.